Editorial entitled "The President We Have," the Wall Street Journal editorial board writes in part this: Mr. Biden would also be wise to bring some high-profile conservatives and Republicans into his administration. In 1940, as the prospect of world war approached, FDR brought in experienced GOP internationalists, Henry Stimson as Secretary of War and Frank Knox as Secretary of the Navy. They built credibility with the public and on Capitol Hill for the hard choices to come. Harry Truman worked with GOP Senator Arthur Vandenberg to build support for NATO at the dawn of the Cold War. Jimmy Carter at least had the hawkish Zbigniew Brzezinski as his national security advisor when the Soviets tried to exploit Mr. Carter's weakness. Mr. Biden desperately needs to diversify the advice he gets beyond the liberal internationalists who dominate his councils. Better advice is needed because Mr. Biden is right that the Russia problem won't go away as long as Mr. Putin sits in the Kremlin. And it's, as I said at the top here, it's my dad's birthday. I'm thinking about him a lot. You know, my father, Joe, as you know, educated me about democracy. But you also know it was his incredible strategic mind that really intimidated me intellectually. And over the past few months, I hear his voice in both of my brothers for the first time. I talk to them all the time now. Mark, who's serving as ambassador to Poland right now, Ian, who worked for President Bush, he's a Republican. They have very different points of view on many things and even on this war. But when I talk to Mark and Ian all the time now, they both have absolutely stepped into this space. And I hear him. I hear our family debates even. I hear his voice, and it's very calming, and it's wonderful. I hear him in the clearest way since the day he died. And, Ed, you've been writing a book about my father, his entire life and his worldview, and you've been talking to my brothers as well. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts to offer.
Yeah, well, I mean, I couldn't add to your memory, your extraordinary memories of your dad, and I know that he subjected you and your brothers to pretty strenuous debates over dinner, you know, when you were children, about geopolitics. So it's in your blood.
Yeah.
I was really struck when President Biden in Warsaw over the weekend turns to Poland's president and says, "We bought you a Brzezinski. We bought you the best." And the fact that there is a Brzezinski, Mark, as ambassador in Poland right now is just an extraordinary turn of history. He's having a baptism of fire as an ambassador, and there couldn't be anybody better qualified in terms of being a Polish speaker, of having lived in Poland, and with the Brzezinski name in Poland right now, because the Brzezinski name is another expression of the message in the speech that Biden gave. I don't speak ill of fellow newspapers, but I have to say I thought that Wall Street Journal editorial saying that Republicans should be bought in to this administration, well, we'd have to narrow it down, because which Republicans?
Right.
How many Republicans are there available who have not backed Putin and who've not backed Trump's relationship with Putin and his attempt to undermine democracy in Ukraine, and his extraordinary sort of conspiratorial, admiring relationship? If you want a split screen, Biden speaking in Warsaw this weekend should have Trump in Helsinki accepting Putin's explanation that Russia didn't interfere in the 2016 elections. That's the split screen. And just a final point, the Wall Street Journal mentioned your father, quite rightly, as a great asset for President Carter, but he was a Democrat, not a Republican.
Yes. No, and but he spoke his mind and often surrounded himself with people who disagreed with him for that very reason that the Wall Street Journal was talking about. And there are Republicans who could be very useful. I understand, Ed, what's happened over the past 4 years. But, you know, I speak to my brother about what's going on in Poland, Joe. But when I want to be forced to think, I call Ian because he really makes me think. And he's got a different angle toward this, and they're both valuable.
Well, you know, I listened to both of them, and actually, they actually are a good synthesis of, if you read your father's writings, where your father would be.
Yeah.
But Admiral Stavridis, I too, while I'm grateful for the Wall Street Journal editorial page saying nice things about Dr. Brzezinski, I'm not exactly sure how this war will end, but I do know how history is going to look at what Joe Biden has done, and I think he's been masterful. I was very critical, hypercritical of Afghanistan. I've been critical of many of his domestic policies, but I will tell you, and I'm curious, you know much more about this than I do, but Joe Biden has taken his time when he's needed to pull the country with him, to pull our alliance together at the same time. He did not get in front of the Germans. He did not get in front of the French. And I believe he's played it masterfully. He hasn't gone as quickly as the Wall Street Journal editorial board would have liked or as others would have liked. But we still have an alliance together with about 30 different countries who want to do 30 different things. That doesn't happen by accident.
Indeed, Joe. Very quickly, two Republicans. How about Bob Gates, or how about Condi Rice, both of whom have PhDs in Russian studies, are totally current in every way, are brilliant strategic thinkers. That would be the top of my list. Break. The NATO alliance, as you say, it's kind of like 30 people on a bicycle, and generally speaking, a few people are up at the front pedaling really fast. There's some people in the middle kind of going along. There's a few people who aren't pedaling in the back, although they're still drafting. This is not that case, and I give real credit to Tony Blinken and his team and Jake Sullivan and his team. They've been on foot patrol throughout Europe for months, pulling this together. And by the way, Joe, it's not just those 30. Back to the theme of Vladimir Putin's head exploding because he's going to get what he doesn't want. How do you like the idea of Sweden and Finland joining NATO, becoming more real by the moment? Last thought, Germany. If you'd told me when I was Supreme Allied Commander they were going to add 100 billion euros to their defense budget, effectively doubling it, I would have fallen over on my face. Remarkable. And it's paralleled across the European continent. I think strong responses here. Vladimir Putin has created that. If there's a silver lining to this, it's alliance unity.
And by the way, Admiral, one thing that Condi Rice and Bob Gates have in common, along with Madeleine Albright and so many others, they worked for Dr. Brzezinski in the Carter White House. He did believe in surrounding himself with people with differing views. So thank you so much.
Ambassador Michael McFaul, David Rothkopf, retired Admiral James Stavridis, thank you all very much. And Ed Lieu, stay with us if you can. Still ahead.
Hey, thanks so much for watching our YouTube channel. You can follow up on today's top stories and breaking news, or catch up on your favorite MSNBC shows all in one place. Download the NBC News app today.